Joe, I don't have.
My brother was stationed at Sampson, and he was a corpsman.
Was he?
In the Navy.
Yeah. Well, then
My name is Russell Bonanno, and a number of years ago, in fact, almost a year after I got out of high school and attending Brooklyn College, the United States government thought it was wise to draft me. And upon that notification, at that time, unlike what sometimes occurred during Vietnam, we didn't head up to Canada or Sweden or the wilds of Montana. My generation was the generation that when Uncle Sam gestured, "I want you," we shrugged our shoulders and said, well, why not? For good or bad. When I went down to Whitehall Street, at that time that was the inducting center, I found out, to my surprise, that instead of being inducted into the Army, drafted, there was, on the papers they gave back to us, which were the medical examinations, at the top of it were 4 letters, very light blue. I was innocent, I was 17 years old, and I didn't know the code, but it read USMC. Now, before I had left that morning, I told my mother that everything was going to be all right, that I would be drafted into the Army, and since I had a year of started Brooklyn College, perhaps I would have a good life, Mom. I would be in the Army. At least I wasn't going to be in the Marines. Well, upon looking at this USMC, I realized that I was going to be in the Marines. And they told us, all you boys who have USMC at the top of your paper, stand up. Now, this was a large hall, and there were a lot of New York guys. And about 25, 30 stood up. He said, okay, I want everybody out in the hall. We went out in the hall. And out in the hall was a man who was dressed like he came from a John Wayne movie. Handsome looking, with the United States Marine Corps officer's uniform and those wonderful colored rainbows across his chest. And he said, gentlemen, now you're 17 years old, and to recall gentlemen was a new thing. He said, gentlemen, I want you all to step into this room. We stepped into the room, and literally in the room there was a line put on the floor on tape from one end of the room to the other, and we were on the other side. He said, I want everybody to hold up your right hand and say after me. Now this was the oath not of office, but this was the oath that would say that I would defend my country, right or wrong I would defend it, and the flag of the United States, etc., etc. And he said, I want to take one step forward past that line. Well, we, again, were the generation that always followed orders, good or bad. We took the oath of office. I, mumble, 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 your name. We all stepped forward. And he says, congratulations. You are now a member of the United States Marine Corps. You have one call to make. Each of you, at this time, the telephone call, I guess, was about a dime. They gave us each a dime, and there were 2 MPs who escorted each individual young man out into the hall with 3 phones. So there were 6 MPs out to the telephone booth to call home, to inform them that we were not going home. From there, we were going directly to Paris Island. Now, on our way to the telephone, I realized about 4 hours ago, I told my mother, who was sobbing, that I would be free. I would have an easy life. I would be in the Army. And I would not be in the Marines. What was I going to say to dear Mom? I dialed, and she said with her voice, yes, as all good mothers say yes. I said, Mom, how are you? She said, oh, Russell. I said, everything's all right. You won't be hearing from me for a while. I'll be sending you a letter, and then, where we'll be. And she said, where will you be? I said, I was told I'd be in Paris Island. She said, where's that? I said, in Yamasee, North Carolina, as though I knew where Yamasee, North Carolina was, but I was informed. I found out where the Yamasee, North Carolina was later on. He says, well, how's everything? I said, well, it's all right. Let me tell you, Mom. I'm in the United States Marine Corps. They drafted me. Well, there was a beat, a pause, and then nothing but a sob. It was a tough time to tell my mom, oh, look, the Marine Corps is not bad at all. I mean, I changed 360 degrees. Okay. They then walked us out into a bus, 25 of us, with one MP, locked the bus from the outside. We drove down to the Lackawanna, I don't know if it's still there, it probably isn't, the Lackawanna Railroad on the west side, onto a barge, sailed across the river. The door was unlocked. We were escorted into a train, and we were told that in about, I guess 10 or 12 hours, we'd be in Yamasee, North Carolina. Now, I always say that Yamasee, North Carolina, because it has inflicted into my brain that it should be said with a slight southern accent. There are no northerners of any kind in Yamasee, North Carolina. Well, okay, here we are. Most of us came from the Bronx. Some of us came from Brooklyn. Nobody came from Queens. And certainly maybe 2 came from Manhattan. I don't know how they ever slipped in. And we had never seen each other. We were dressed as the young men in the early 50s were dressed. I had sideburns down to here. At that time, I had a lot of hair, and it showed, but not long hair. I mean, the pompadour, remember? Italian and from the Bronx. And I had what was generally called a DA. Not only I, but everybody. So we were all New York boys, basically, we were all wise guys. And immediately, as soon as we left the train station in New Jersey, going on down, the MP said, who's the biggest guy here? So this guy from, I guess, Brooklyn, big, says, I am. You could tell that he was going to be a leader. The MP said, you're in charge of this group. So he said, yeah, I am? He said, yeah. And remember that. And when you get down there, when they ask who's in charge of this group, you say you are. Now this boy from New York didn't realize he was being set up. That's a little later. So okay, in the 14 hours, 12 hours it took to get there, some of us slept, some of us ate, most of us were playing cards. A couple of guys were playing craps. They probably came from Brooklyn. We pull into Yamasee, North Carolina. And in Yamasee, North Carolina, in this train station, it was probably a one-horse town, because it was a one-horse town. The only thing there was a big bus. And as we pulled in, most of us said, hey, that must be the, hey, yeah, okay. Well, as one thing led to another, the train stopped, and we were all sitting in double seats, in an aisle, double seats. And this very, very big, giant Marine walked in and leapt from the entrance of that car to the first 2 seats. One foot was straddled here, and the other one was across the aisle. You couldn't stage this better. Arms akimbo, he said, okay, and then the rest of the language I don't care to repeat. He said, now I want everybody here to get your stuff and get out of this door and head for that bus. Quick. He said, by the way, who's in charge here? So our friend from Brooklyn, a wise guy, said, I am. He said, yeah, well, stand up. You look like a good boy. He stood up, and with that, as he was standing, this guy slapped him across the face. He said, you're not a leader yet. Well, when that happened to the biggest guy, can you imagine guys like myself, how we must have felt? Like, what did we get into here? What is the USMC, after all? Okay, we all stood up and crowded. It was like somebody had said, fire. We could, whatever the order was, yeah. We're rushing down this aisle, down those steps. Now, everybody knows that the steps of a railroad car are like this. So, you know, you don't really go down normally. You kind of trip down. As we were going down the steps, there was two Marines, one on one side of the exit, one on the other side. They had their hats off. And as the fellows passed them, they kept on hitting them. Pop, pop, pop. I mean, it was like we're entering a concentration camp. There's no doubt about it. We're not in America. Running like fools to the bus. We get in the bus. Most of us are sweating. I didn't realize, I never realized how much I sweated underneath my armpits until that moment. We get in the bus, and the bus driver was a Marine. The Mr. Marine, who stood on top of the aisle, came in and said, okay, boys, you have now, what is it, 4, 8, 12, about 10 weeks to find out if you're a man or not. Well, you know, New York boys, we're going, we had finally got our dignity back. And the bus started. And everybody went boom like this. And somebody in the back went, moo, moo, like old cattle. So this sergeant turned around and he said, okay, boys, you're having your fun now. Wait until we get to camp. Well, it started from that point on. 12 weeks later, I came out a totally different person. I could take orders without questioning them. I felt pride in myself and in the unit. I was a 17-year-old that felt like he was 30. We got a leave to go back to our home for 1 week, and then we would report back to Paris Island. And went home, and of course, everybody in their own separate worlds were obviously greeted. I mean, our shoulders were straighter, we looked healthy, and we were. I'm not telling you about anything that happened at Paris Island because there were some wild things that did happen. A lot of terror. Most of it was terror. They wanted to make sure that we were psychologically fit, not so much physically, but psychologically fit. The physical part of it would come in later in Camp Pendleton. When we were returned back to individually and corrected back again, we were joined by a contingent of Marines from Puerto Rico. So it was about 150 wise guys, who are now no more wise guys, from the Bronx and Brooklyn, Manhattan, young Puerto Ricans, Hispanics from their own culture who were great pride, and that pride was then directed into becoming a Marine. And we were waiting for our orders, and our orders were that we would, the next day after we arrived back at Paris Island, we would be directed to fly a plane, or we would be put in the plane, to Camp Pendleton. I remember the DI, the last day he said, you boys, I want to tell you, your warm bodies are going to replace the cold ones in Korea. By that time, we could almost take anything like that type of an insult. So we finally get to Pendleton, and it's in a major advanced military infantry training. And about, I guess, my God, after a while you lose a sense of time in a place like that. But I guess about a month and a half, we were all ready to go to Korea. And we were taking a ship to Korea. The last night we were supposed to leave, some of us were assigned to other units, but stateside. And they were very dear friends. And they had a beer bash. Now, the ordinary beer bash you might get in colleges are nothing compared to beer bashes that are on Marine Corps bases. There's a gross difference. And the beer bash was in the Quonset hut, a massive Quonset hut, that all of the units who were going that next day were invited, and they could drink as much beer as they wanted. So you're 17 years old, and you're drinking. But you're drinking under controlled situations. The only thing about it was that there were long seats. It was a mess hall, so there was long seats and tables, and every once in a while there was a garbage can. And they served the beer not in cups, but in bottles. So you have to think about this. A very large Quonset hut with about 1,500 men in, ranging from 17 to 19. They had gone through Paris Island. They had gone through advanced training. They were ready to combat anybody or anything. And it was their last night in the United States of America. Somebody, somewhere during the night, thought it was a great idea to take their empty bottle of beer and to see if they could put it in that garbage can over there, which was 10 or 15 feet away. And so that started a kind of a contest. And in about 10 minutes, one of the worst, I think it was almost the worst moment in my life, even worse than what was going on, would later on go on in Korea, because everybody there began to throw beer bottles at the closest garbage can. It started into a riot. My friends and I said, let's get the heck out of here. And literally, we, on our hands and knees, because there were bottles thrown, this was like in a movie, I couldn't believe it. I said, I'm going to get killed even before I get out of the United States. We crawled out of that place. At that time, the SPs, the police of the Navy, had arrived, 2 truckloads. They were emptying out into this place to try to calm these wild Marines. Fights broke out. They had to break out, you might say, hoses to hose everybody down. It was a riot, because we felt that, I guess some of the guys who were, wilder, felt that what could the United States government do? Break us to civilians? I mean, Okay, 18 days later, we arrive in Kobe, Japan, for a one-day stayover until we go to Korea. And we were given our first leave. Can you imagine? You're 17, 18 years old. You're in Kobe, Japan. You haven't had a drink in 18 days. You haven't seen a woman, et cetera, et cetera. So they went off into different groups to invade, literally, all the bars and what have you in Kobe, Japan, and to spread United States kindness. And there was one caveat. We were told that you had to get back to the boat by 12 o'clock. Well, some guys did, some guys didn't. The guys who didn't were later arrested and brought back to Korea and put into infantry units immediately. It was like, here again. Well, we're all infantry anyway. We get to Korea, and we had to go 3 days of training in the swamp area of Korea just to get us back into training. And finally, after 3 days, this one night, I found myself in the back of a truck heading up toward the front lines. Now, in Korea, it was like World War I. There was, by this time, there was a trench line that spread from the East Coast to the West Coast. It was above Seoul. What is interesting about that is that until that time, I had never desired a cigarette, chewing tobacco, you name it. We're back of this truck. We're all huddled with our gear. And as we got close, an artillery round passed over this truck column and landed, I would say, about 300 or 400 yards on a hill. Now, later on, we will find out that 300 or 400 yards would be, we would consider it miles away. But at this point in time, 300 or 400 yards was like, my God, it's at my foot. I don't know what happened. It must have keyed off something that was integrated in my brain ever since I was a child to smoke. But I turned to the Marine next to me. I said, who's got a cigarette? Never smoked before. And that point on until the present day, I averaged 5 packs of cigarettes a day in Korea. I mean, you got up with a cigarette, you went to bed with a cigarette. It was one of those things. And they always gave us, in Red Cross packages, Chuckles and Hershey bars and cigarettes. Chuckles. I don't know if they still make Chuckles, but we hated Chuckles to the point where we had one fellow who said that when he was going back, he was going to get dynamite and blow up the Chuckles factory. About the time I stayed there, well, there was action because we were up in the front lines. And I belonged to the 7th Marine, 7th George Company of 7th Marines. And we were up on line for 40 days at a time and back maybe 10 days or less than a month and back up again. They shifted us back and forth. We were the 19th draft, which meant that 10 drafts later, if you were still alive, you would be back home. The situation being what it was, that we were always counting the drafts. The new fellows that joined the companies. We felt that a draft closer means the draft going home, back home. And some of us obviously didn't make it. The more I think about it is that it was a time that one matured overnight. One or two stories I could like to tell you, one of which I know, this for a fact, one of the times that we were taken back from the front line, that our company suffered a lot of casualties. We were driven back to a gathering area of tents and we'd stay there. We passed what seemed to be a very, very long-barreled artillery piece, which was maybe about 5 miles from the front line. And most of us said, what's that? And one of the fellows said, that's an atomic cannon. So I've never been able to trace it, but we had atomic artillery in Korea. Something else, near the end of my stay, we were training to have an amphibious landing up in North Korea. Never came about because at Panmunjom, there was a meeting, and of course they finally had the armistice. But there were two things that are always back in my mind, that if they hadn't signed that particular peace offering, I would have wound up in North Korea coming down boats like as in World War II. And number two, possibly if there was a breakout of the Chinese army, because we were fighting the Chinese and more so than the Koreans. Why I know that is because very seldom did we see a prisoner or a dead North Korean that was over 6 feet. We knew the North Koreans from the Chinese because the North Koreans were about 5 feet 5, 5 feet 6. And then we knew that we were fighting some Chinese because the dead ones or the prisoners were about 6'2". So, and they didn't understand Korean because we had Korean army men near our units. One other thing, this was the United Nations battle, and when our company was taken back and given a slight rest and we were replaced, we were usually replaced by a foreign country contingent. And this one little story, we were replaced by a Turkish outfit. Now, these young Turks always had, every one of the young Turk army men had a dagger by his side who could throw a dagger from here to the end of the studio. And they used to teach us how to do that. But an interesting story, the captain of the outfit that replaced us had a meeting with our captain in the captain's bunker at the very beginning. And he said, I want to tell you that we will certainly make contact with the enemy. That when you come back, I will prove to you that we will make contact with the enemy. And about less than a month later, we replaced them. And the story was that, and of course our captain did tell us this, that as he approached his bunker, his command post, the captain of the Turkish regiment or company came out and said, what did I tell you? We have made contact now, we'll prove to you. He says, come. And he entered his bunker. Now when he left, you know, the bunkers were made out of sandbags and overlay of timber. But as he entered, he noticed there were, from the 3 walls were covered by ears. And the Turkish captain said, you see, we made contact. That was a bit of honor of the Turkish army. It was to take the ear off the enemy, to prove that they made contact. Well, as luck would have it, I survived that. I survived the war, among other things. And when the 29th draft replaced us, we were taken from our company and brought down to Seoul, and we had to guard a Oriental boat with all our gear on, and we had to guard it without ammunition. And there we are, about 10 of us from our company chosen, overnight guarding this boat laden down with all of the material that everybody owned. We were attacked by young Korean boys throwing rocks because they wanted to come on board and take and steal all the knapsacks and everything. And there we were with our rifles, with no ammunition, and we had to defend ourselves. So what do we do as good Americans? As the rocks came hurling at us from the port side, from the dock, we picked up the rocks and threw it back. And I can remember my last battle in Korea was a rock fight. And we were joined by, we were the first contingent of Marines back after the armistice. And we were joined by those prisoners of war from the Army and the Marines during the Korean War. And there was something like about 1,100 on the USS Walker troop ship. So there was the 29th draft after going through 10 months of this, and we were joined by prisoners of war, Americans. And some of them had been converted. And the trip back was one of, they had to separate us, because some of these young Americans, like ourselves, were trying to convert us to the Marxist way of life. And there were many, many fights on board that troop ship until we hit San Francisco and Treasure Island. And I'll remember that as long as I live, that here we were trying to convince these Americans who were trying to convince us that they had a better life than we did. And that's all I can say about that.
Russell, it's really been an honor talking with you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, 2821.